All right, everyone, just for fun, I thought I'd show you the mask that we are turning out at the shop just for people in general, not necessarily for hospital workers, but since the CDC is now going to recommend that people wear masks out in public, I thought I'd show you the 3-layer one that we are doing that goes really quickly. It uses elastic if you have it. I'm using elastic today. If you don't, you can just put ties on it. That's fine too. It'll work exactly the same, but it takes a lot less time than the Navicin approved one. And it uses a little bit less fabric. All right, I just want to quickly show you the materials that we're starting with. We've got 3 layers of fabric. Over here is a muslin that goes against your face that is nice and soft. This is our filter layer. This is a flannel that works pretty well. It's just all been pre-washed. And then this is a cotton that has your nice design on it. And then up here, I've got 2 pieces of elastic. They're 7 inches a piece, and those are for your ears. The first thing we're going to do is pin the elastic onto the outer layer. That seems to work the best. So I'm going to take 1 piece of elastic and I'm going to place it in the lower corner of my outer fabric, and I'm going to pin it with the pin head facing out, which is a little fiddly, but it reminds you where the elastic is when you've got all the other layers on top of it. So there's one side, and I'm just going to bring the other end up to the other side and pin it the exact same way. And it looks like it's not long enough, like it'll curl up while you're sewing it, but never fear, it'll all be fine. So I'm just going to do the exact same thing on the other side with the other piece of elastic. My elastic is all pinned, so now I'm going to add the other layers. We're going to go with the muslin next and just place it right on top there. Line it up as best you can. You can fix it a little later when you're pinning. And then the last layer that goes on is going to be the flannel. Now we go in this order because we are going to be using a technique called bagging, which basically means we're going to leave a gap open right down here, but we're going to sew all the way around here. And then we're going to turn the whole thing inside out. We're going to be working on it inside out, and we're going to turn the whole thing right side out. And so the layers need to be in this order so that when you turn it right side out, the muslin's on the back, the nice fabric is on the front, and the flannel is encased in the middle. So I'm going to pin it. I like to pin things starting with the gap that I'm going to leave, and I pin those with the pin heads facing out again, so that tells me where to start and stop. A little bit of pin language there. So I've pinned, that's my gap, so I know not to sew in between here. I'm going to start here and go around. All right, so then I'm going to pin the rest of this all the way around, and we pin corners diagonally like this to show that we're going to turn the corner, and then straight sides just straight like that. There's another corner. I'm going to pin that diagonally. Oh, my tripod fell over. Ha ha ha, homemade. All right, so I'll just finish pinning all the way around here, and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, it's all pinned now, ready to go to the machine. So remember, this is the pins facing out are where we're going to start and stop. So I'll start here and stitch, pivot, stitch up here, pivot, stitch, pivot, stitch, pivot, and then stitch 2 here. The pins facing out show me where to start and stop, and these pins facing out show me where the elastic is. And that's important because as we're going up down these short sides, I take a minute and back stitch a couple times over where the elastic is, and that strengthens the elastic. It won't pull out if it's got many layers of stitches in it. It just makes it that much stronger. So I'm going to take this to my machine. All right, so we're all stitched, and you can see it's a pretty small seam. I went by the outside of the presser foot. Sometimes I had to fudge a little bit, like this one had to be a little bit bigger because, you know, the 3 pieces of fabric are not going to be exactly the same size, you know, unless you're a machine. But see, I left my gap open here, and I stitched all the other ends, and I'll show you if it'll focus. This is where an elastic is, and I've stitched back and forth across it so that the elastic won't pull out. Now we're going to do what's called trimming, clipping, and turning. Normally, when we do a seam like this, it's a bigger seam, it's a 5/8 seam, so we trim the excess. We're not going to do that. We're going to skip the trimming. We're just going to go to the clipping and the turning. So clipping means clipping these corners here, just on a diagonal like that. That gets the excess fabric out of the seam so that it turns into a nice sharp corner. So I'm going to do all 4 of those. Clip, clip, clip. Now, the reason we left a gap is so that we can turn this right side out, really. It's inside out right now, but we're going to turn it right side out. So the whole thing is going to go through that little gap. And I like to use the elastics to help me pull it out. And see, now they're in there strong. They're not going anywhere. All right, now grab any pointy thing. We call it a pokey thingy. This is a stylus that I lifted from a student. They left it, you know, over summer, so I figured I could have it. Go inside and into the corner and just poke it out so that it's nice and sharp. Now, this will tell you how good your stitching is, because I cannot tell you how many times I have gone to poke corners out, and the pokey thing goes right through, and you have to go back and stitch it again. This seems fine. I was careful since it's a demonstration. Okay, so we've got nice crisp corners now. Now I'm going to take this to my iron, and I'm going to press it so that the seams are nice and flat so that we can top stitch. Now this is fine. This is still open, but that's okay. I'm going to press it together like that. Oop, sort of like that. And when we top stitch, we'll just stitch that shut as well. So I'm going to go press. All right, it's all nice and pressed now. You can see the seams are nice and flat. Our corners are nice and sharp. So now it's time to pleat and top stitch. So pleating, I use my exact same technique. I take my middle finger underneath each side, fold over, and pin one side, pin the other side. And then I'll just do that same technique for a second time and then a third time. Now we're all pleated and ready to go to the machine, so let me tell you what I'm going to be doing. This is the gap, so I look at that as the bottom of the mask, but it's really not going to matter. So here's the top, and I start on the pleat side, and I do about 1/4 inch, and I do the same thing as I did with the elastic. I go down and then reverse back up it and go down again. So it's got 3 rows of stitches holding those pleats in place. Because the amount of use these are going to get, I'm just afraid that if it's one layer of stitches, it's just going to pull out. So I go down, reverse, and down again. Then I just go across the long end at about 1/8 inch. It's top stitching, so it needs to look nice and pretty. About 1/8 inch. And then go up this pleat side, do the same thing, down, up, and back down again. And then across the top, and it'll be done. There she is, all top stitched. And you can see the, well, you can't really see, it's dark. There we go. The top stitching at the top is really close to the edge, just to secure that, the seam that we did. And then on either pleated end, I've got several rows of stitches holding those pleats in place. So this is a great mask that you can wear out in public. Once the CDC starts requiring us to. These are much easier. You can use whatever you have for the filter layer. I happen to have a ton of flannel. You can use an extra layer of cotton. I know people have put coffee filters in there, just whatever you have that you think will work. Happy sewing!